I'm Peter A. Newman, and I'm an associate professor in the Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work and Canada Research Chair in Health and Social Justice. The biggest part of my research in terms of global health research is around issues around the full spectrum of the development and testing and future dissemination of HIV vaccines. The basic notion is that, so I'm obviously coming from Faculty of Social Work, and my background is social science, that it's really important that we have more biomedical tools for prevention of HIV. However, merely having a biomedical tool unfortunately doesn't obviate, it doesn't take away all the very powerful social, psychological, structural factors that are implicated in the tremendous spread of HIV around the globe. And so that my research focuses on anticipating and engaging with current and future social and behavioral challenges that will exist potentially for these new prevention technologies. So in India, it's more preliminary work we're doing in terms of some communities at higher risk for HIV. Part of it is about clinical trial literacy and HIV treatment and prevention literacy, because community engagement requires communities to have some abilities to be able to converse with investigators, with volunteers, with non-governmental organizations. So we're trying to equip people and start sort of small in terms of educational campaigns so that people, to be able to really engage as a community, you want to be able to know, well, what potential rights do you have and what are the potential risks, and then how might you negotiate favorable terms where a trial could take place, but that it would also ultimately hopefully benefit the community, even if the particular drug or vaccine in the trial doesn't work. Cultural differences is more, I've done more kind of deeper and long-term research in Thailand, and so I thought one interesting thing we found that in the US, in Canada, for example, of course the main concern about, let's say, a future vaccine is how effective is it or not? You know, how well is it going to work? And that will determine to a large part the extent to which people say, yes, I'll try this vaccine. Another is, of course, how much it costs. Even in Canada, you know, there could be a co-payment depending on how high the cost is, and that becomes obviously more important as people of lower income, who also tend to be people at higher risk for HIV. But in Thailand, another thing that was really important, and I do believe it's along the lines of a potential cultural difference, is that one possibility for an HIV vaccine, and this includes in a trial as well, is the notion that you could be HIV positive. You might test positive in a routine HIV test. Now, there are ways of doing more extensive testing where you could know, no, you don't have HIV. That's a normal, natural reaction to the vaccine. It means you have a vaccine in you. Similarly to when you have a TB vaccine, you know, you can be tested, and I mean, you would say that you had the vaccine. It doesn't mean you have tuberculosis. But HIV brings very huge levels of potential stigma and also very real-world discrimination in many contexts, so that understandably people have some concerns that are a little bit different than merely testing positive for some other diseases, even though they know they don't have the disease. That exists in Canada too, but in Thailand there was really more of a concern with that in terms of what the local community, what people close to me, my family and my peer group might think about me if I tested positive, even though I don't have HIV. So that there's stigma associated with a potential prevention technology. So that's one of the avenues it's very important to deal with. Right? We often rightfully think of prevention as a purely positive thing. So what we kind of need to look at are what are the potential risks of prevention. And the reason to do that is not to shoot the prevention out of the water, it's to say, how are we going to optimize the use of this vaccine? So that there's a cultural value in Thailand and Thai, they say Krengjai. It's like, we have it too, but it's more strong there in terms of very strong concern for what other people, especially people close to you, think about you, and that you really respect, and that respect and kind of maintaining face and a good place in the world and in harmony in relationships is really a preeminent value. So that testing positive for HIV might disturb this really important issue. So it's something we can do education about. It's something that we can mitigate the risks around. It's not like a no-go, but it's something that arose more strongly in the context of Thailand than in Canada or the US as a potential challenge for either being in a trial or disseminating a vaccine in the future. It's this false positive HIV testing. On the very positive side, in Thailand and in many contexts, so I mean, you mentioned why do people join trials in the first place? I mean, in Canada too, there's a large altruistic component, and in Thailand that was there's a very strong value as a predominantly Buddhist country on altruism. And so that was a very powerful motivator for people both to join a trial, but also to make sure if a vaccine were available to take up the vaccine, not only to protect myself, but to protect my partner, my wife, so that I couldn't infect them. And that was a very important aspect of it. So there are certainly certain shared human experiences, but there are some differences in terms of different countries of what sort of rises to be very important of what people think about in terms of joining a clinical trial or accepting a vaccine in the future.